Figure versus ground is when we organize stimuli in our visual field into objects, called figures, that stand out from their surroundings, called the ground. This picture shows figure versus ground because we perceive the poster of Mike as being the figure, or what we focus on, while the wall behind him becomes the background, which we don't give as much of our attention to. Proximity is when we group nearby objects together. This picture demonstrates proximity because we perceive the vents as being organized in columns rather than rows because of the distances between them. Similarity is when we group similar figures together. This picture demonstrates similarity because we perceive a cross, a spire, and the words Bishop Fian because the tiles painted to create each of these elements are similar. For example, we group the yellow tiles together to perceive a spire and a cross because they look similar to each other and different from their surroundings because they are yellow. Continuity is when we perceive smooth continuous patterns rather than discontinuous ones. This picture demonstrates continuity because we perceive the letters of scholarship as one continuous line rather than separate lines for each letter. Connectedness is when we perceive objects that are uniform and linked as a single unit. This picture demonstrates connectedness because we perceive the railing as being one continuous structure going both up and down the stairs, when in fact there are two separate railings connected by 3 bars. Closure is when we fill in gaps to create a complete whole object. This picture of a fire alarm demonstrates closure because we perceive the speaker portion as being a complete circle, in effect connecting the separate dots to create a whole circle.
In linear perspective, as lines converge, objects appear farther away. When we look down the hallway, the lines on the ceiling and floor appear closer and closer together the farther we look. Thus we can tell that the end of the hallway with the stairs is farther away from the point where the picture was taken than the door with the bat on it is. Interposition is when the layering of objects over each other gives us information about distance. If one object partially blocks another, we perceive it as closer. This picture is perceived as closer than the one with the 2 girls because it partially blocks the view of the girls. Relative height is when objects that are higher in our field of vision are perceived as being farther away. Because the road and the trees are higher on our retina than the stone patio, we perceive them as farther from where the picture was taken than the patio is. This is because the patio is toward the bottom of our field of vision, while the road is closer to the top. In relative size, when 2 objects are assumed to be a similar size, the one that casts a smaller retinal image is generally perceived as being farther away. We know that these lockers are all the same size. However, because the first locker on the left in the row appears larger and thus takes up more of our retinal field than the locker on the far right, we perceive that this locker on the left is closer than this locker on the right. Shape constancy is when we are able to perceive the form of familiar objects as constant even while our retinal image of them changes. From the angle of the wall along the lockers, this red box appears to be a tiny line with a handle. However, we know that it is in fact a larger rectangular box with a handle because it is familiar and we walk by it nearly every day. Our mind knows that the shape of the box does not change simply because our angle of vision has. In size constancy, we perceive objects as having a constant size even when our distance from them and the amount of retinal field they take up varies. We are aware that this top stair is the same size as this bottom stair, despite the fact that it appears smaller because it is farther away and takes up less space in our retina. In color constancy, we perceive familiar objects as having a consistent color even if changes in illumination alter the wavelengths they reflect. Because of the lack of light hitting this side of the box, it is in shadow and appears much darker than the front of the box. However, we know that the entire box is the same shade of red regardless of the amount of light it receives.